Everyone, thanks for joining us. It's James Davis, the Director of Academy, and we're doing another TSP talk. And this time I have Elliot joining us, and he's our Senior Solutions Engineer down in this part of the world in Asia, and thought we'd have a discussion around the cybersecurity state of play. We've just spent 2 weeks traveling Australia and New Zealand, talking to a few hundred partners around what's going on. So how you doing, Elliot? What's been happening?
Yeah, pretty good today. It's been a hectic last 2 weeks, getting around, visiting partners across ANZ. A lot of good content, a lot of good conversations, particularly around the cybersecurity space. I believe a lot of partners are really starting to get the, have that light bulb moment where they realise they've got to do a little bit more around their cybersecurity stack, and not just sort of hope for the best. So it's good to see that, it's moving in the right direction. But there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, in terms of getting them prepared.
It's good to see. It's been a while. It's been a lot of marketing effort from the vendors, and I think a lot of demand from clients that I'm seeing, that MSPs are realising that they need to do cybersecurity. What do you see from those conversations you've been having with partners? What do you think partners are doing well at the moment? What are you seeing?
Yeah, when I look at I guess when this became a thing several years ago, partners sort of just sat on their hands and then, thought, I don't need to sort of move, I don't need to transition. But with all the latest, big incidents that occurred over the last couple of years, a lot of them are waking up and realizing I need to effectively do something. So a lot of them, from a strategic point of view, are putting cybersecurity high in their to-do list. I need to focus on expanding this out. I need to leverage things like the essential aids, and and obviously the government's doing a really good job promoting that and getting people more aware, which is helping their clientele a little bit, become more familiar with what they need to be concerned about. So partners, still struggle in certain ways, but I think the difference from several years ago is they're now taking it seriously, which, when I first started speaking to partners back in the day, they were just, I'll sit on my laurels, I will make do with what I got, the standard things like backup, firewalls, patching. That's all I need to be concerned about. But obviously the state of the threat landscape has drastically changed, and they're now open to having these discussions, which, back in the day, they were just pushing back and saying, I don't need it, because their clients were telling them they don't need it. So they're situating themselves more as wanting to be that leader in cybersecurity by being that true trusted advisor, by saying, I will actually, help secure you. I want to do more for you, rather than, this is all I'm going to provide. This is all I know. They realise that there's a lot more they could be doing, and hopefully that opens up a lot more opportunity.
Well, that's what I'm observing as well, is that client demand is going up, and MSPs are definitely seeing the opportunity, especially as we are hitting that commoditization of the end user support and the changes to what we need to manage in terms of infrastructure. It's sort of becoming that default growth trajectory for MSPs, in the direction they can easily sort of pivot to without doing any dramatic directional change. And there is so much opportunity. I know I spoke to a few partners where they're starting to realize as well, MSSPs don't really fit the bill for a lot of small businesses. And the MSPs are sort of the only ones that can fill the gaps to help mitigate risk in the small businesses around ANZ and Asia. And there's a lot of revenue to be made from sort of being the good guys and helping the small businesses better understand their requirements and what the threats are, and how to reduce those risks. So what do you see? How are you seeing people take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, well, you're right. With the particularly with small business and even medium business, they generally don't want to work with multiple providers. So it really comes down to the MSP to become that MSSP, to become that security expert as well. So at the end of the day, they see those opportunities and they realise they need to do something. Where they could be leading with is trying to understand more around their stack and trying to create those opportunities by showing the value that they need to bring, particularly around understanding what they need to be securing, understanding the data in the back end. For those particular clients, they need to effectively come in with a sound strategy, because a lot of them are playing it pretty loose and just coming in and saying, I've got this new tool that I need to, provide you that's going to, secure you for this aspect or this aspect. So they need to come in with a more focused, train of thought to effectively provide a full-fledged service rather than, singular offerings from time to time.
What are you seeing in terms of that? Like you're talking about a more full-fledged offering. When you're talking that sort of language, what do you mean? Like, what is it? Me coming in doing pen tests and providing SOC and SIEM stuff? Is that the end goal, or are you seeing something different for MSPs and what they need to deliver?
No, it's really getting the basics right. So the Essential 8 is something that obviously is front of mind for everyone, particularly with the clients, and they're asking for it. With on the back of new regulations and then government effectively enforcing it at the federal level. But the opportunity, I think, can start from a baseline, which is understanding what they need to secure first. So the tricky thing with partners is they tend to focus too much attention on the standard stuff they know. So again, backup and patching, firewall management, AV, but they're not doing a good job. They're not really understanding, all right, well, is this going to actually cover, my baselines? Is this going to give me, that single risk mitigation that I'm looking for? So they need to be looking further and sort of identifying, using a framework, whether that's Essential 8 or a number of the other frameworks out there. But where I see the challenge mainly with partners is effectively they don't know how to sell security. And one of the drivers is they don't know what they actually need to protect. So one of the things I generally advise when I have conversation with partners is, all right, well, firstly, we need to understand what they have in their environments and understand the assets. We also need to have something tangible that we can present to the clients, the managing directors of those companies, or the security compliance officers, and that all begins with something like understanding the vulnerabilities, understanding the gaps in their space. So there are a number of tools out there that you can use to do effectively those assessments, and that's going to help to drive and open up those conversations. From the security side, it shouldn't be just about selling a singular tool that's going to achieve something that the client doesn't understand. You need to actually give them the data to say, this is, what we've done as part of a security health check, if you like, to effectively, and this is what we need to do on the back end to secure those potential gaps you have in your environment.
It's an interesting point, because it's something I've been talking to partners with quite a lot about. Obviously, we're a technology industry, so we default to the technical stuff because that's what we know and we feel comfortable about. But it's huge gaps in our probably knowledge and affinity towards the people and process side. And your comment around MSPs not really knowing how to sell security and being able to identify the gaps. What I observe is a lot of partners don't know how to have that sort of strategic risk based conversation. In the past, we're very good at having those conversations about backup risk and like individual tactical items rather than a whole of business item and at that director level. So what are some tips and things that you've discussed with partners on how to have those conversations and what to sort of focus on.
Yeah, one of the things that's come up, and this is ongoing, and it'll probably be something that a lot of partners sort of tend to over focus on, is feeling that things like backup, right? That's the one thing that's going to prevent me from any sort of security service out there, or security type of incident or attack. And they generally pivot to that and then don't think about anything else that might happen, and how to actually add a prevention layer to it. So using this as an example, that gives a good sort of guideline, and this framework that gives a good guideline on what you need to do. And recovery backup is effectively the last piece of the puzzle. But a lot of MSPs consider that the first piece of the puzzle, right? If I back up, I don't need to worry about anything else. Backup is effectively your insurance policy, and that's not going to prevent, some of the incidents that we've seen in the market today, which is, things like extortion, using Medibank and Optus as an example. A lot of that PII data was ripped out as part of those attacks, and they were used to effectively extort the businesses, which they can choose to not pay out or not pay out, similar to like a ransomware attack. But there's a dramatically high impact there, because you're actually releasing that personal data out to the market, into the dark web. That can be used for other nefarious purposes. So there needs to be a shift of focus, rather than thinking, all right, backup's going to be my one security element, that's going to do everything and anything from a security perspective. Well, not really, because effectively that's the cure, right? That's your last resort, from a security perspective. They need to pivot to more of a prevention type mentality, which is, right, how do we stop these? How do we prevent these types of attacks from happening? How do we prevent that data, that PII information from being extracted before it becomes a problem? Because that's where effectively a lot of the changes in legislation that the federal governments, even state governments, are potentially bringing in. When we look at off the back of what happened last year with all those incidents, that could potentially shift us to more of a GDPR style approach. And if that's the case, there are going to be additional fines and penalties for not securing that PII data, and that's heavily reliant on having that prevention mentality. If we can get the prevention right, we don't have to worry about the cure, but the cure is there, the backup is there in case everything else fails. And that's where MSPs need to shift their focus to say, all right, what can I need to be able to do more. What can I do to effectively secure that information and make sure that's not released?
It's an interesting point about the legislation. A lot of discussions I have, most MSPs aren't aware of what legislation there is and what regulations are in specific industries. And this is often where we don't know our clients well enough and our industry verticals well enough to be able to have those risk-based conversations, because cybersecurity isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And probably one of the dangers I'm seeing is it's being treated that way in the industry. A lot of vendors are trying to take that approach as well, of just trying to push out that sort of generic advice and blanket approaches. And it doesn't apply to different MSPs. And what you mentioned before around like that baseline, often what I'm seeing with MSPs is that we're trying to overshoot what we're trying to start with in terms of our cybersecurity approach. We're trying to get to this end state that might be correct or might not be, and not executing. Whereas if we have that sort of starting baseline that's suitable for our clients, and we know that we're having that conversation, and can sort of have that longer term education journey with them, because the threat landscape is changing. Just what you've said there, backup used to be the way to solve ransomware, but it's evolved into extortion. It's evolved into a lot more of the account breaches and spear phishing attacks, different types of things to what we were probably traditionally used to. And a lot of that's not technical controls either. It's our client education and awareness. How are you seeing MSPs going with that sort of education and security awareness training side?
A lot of them know they need to do stuff. A lot of them know they need to either work with the vendors to understand what the tool does, and a lot of them focus their attention on that. Many of them, I think, we've had these discussions a lot in the past. They don't do nearly enough to understand their specific industries. They don't know the ins and outs of their verticals or their regions that they might be working in, the specific laws and regulations that might apply to them and their focused niche businesses. So I think they need to get out and do a lot more education around. Well, it's not just about the tool set. I need to understand it's about the whole security holistic approach when it comes to, am I supporting it from a functionality perspective, or from a broader terms is looking at, what is the industry actually looking for? Looking at finance as an example, they have relevant regulations in the finance industry. So if you're an MSP or TSP that's working within those, banking, accounting, finance sectors, you need to effectively, subscribe to, the best practices that they're recommending. You need to, look at things like SOC 2 compliance, anything that's relevant to that particular industry. But like you mentioned before, they're considering security, a security approach at least, as a one size fits all, but that's not necessarily the case when you sort of condense it down to those specific verticals. So, partners are doing a good job in terms of understanding their tool sets, understanding their vendors, but they really need to, look wider and cast a wider net to effectively understand their specific areas of interest. Especially if they are really focused on a particular niche industry.
Pivoting a little bit, how would you rate from the conversations you've been having with MSPs about their own security and securing their own house?
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen with partners is they're a little bit more honest as to where they're at. They understand that they don't know what they don't know, and they're looking for advice, which is a really comforting change. When we're having those conversations, again, going back years ago, everyone says, well, I'm doing it. I'm doing everything I need to do. But they haven't really looked at it from a holistic approach. So I think a lot of them, we're going to rate them from 1 to 10. A lot of them are probably sitting at 2 or 3, mark. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but a lot of them are owning that, and a lot of them are going out there and looking for advice, whether it's speaking to industry experts or getting help with coaching, or just leveraging their peers, understanding what they're doing differently or what they're doing right, and trying to get a little bit more information around the next steps they need to take. The issue with that is they're collecting this information but not doing anything with it. They're not actually taking that next step into that cybersecurity journey. They're just collecting all the information, and again, sitting on their hands and not really understanding. I think it comes down to maybe the information they're collecting is a little bit overwhelming, and they get a little bit confused as to what do I need to go to next. So I think there's an opportunity there, and at Pax8, obviously we try to sort of help guide them to those next steps and provide a little bit of a stepped approach into sort of how to start building this out, because effectively they need to start somewhere. Right? If they're not doing something with security now, well, like we've said before, threat actors are not going to wait around and wait for you to get ready. They're going to start hitting you where it hurts. So I think partners are on the right track. They just need to, that little sort of push or nudge in the right direction to get to that next step, and then it'll start getting better from there.
Yeah, it's a very good perspective. We as small business people always get caught up in there's always so much to do and it's a never-ending task list. And we probably always try and bite off more than we can chew. We set too lofty a goal, and then we either get paralyzed by that and don't get started, or we get started and because we haven't planned it out well enough, we execute in the wrong direction and do really well at that. So often the advice I've been giving partners, especially out on the road shows this time around, was take it slower, take the time to plan, and then just pick off what's important now and execute on it, and then do the next step, and then do the next step.
Exactly.
You've got no hope in hell of trying to achieve everything in like a quarter or even 12 months. This is a business transformation journey that will take years, but it's taking one step at a time and executing on it well, and knowing that you'll come back and refine it as well. And it's probably something I'm seeing that I'd mentioned around people creating their stacks, going back to what you were talking about before. People are really starting to understand the technology offerings and the technical controls. They may not have aligned it properly with a framework, so they've got direction with it, but they're starting to develop those stacks. But we're making that mistake of the past when we created our MSPs and our managed services. The way we're creating those productized bundles is going to be dangerous for us in the future, because we're trying to stuff as much in as possible without pricing it up correctly, without understanding that this will change and evolve. And often we're going into our clients selling them as, well, this is our one size fits all, it's going to solve all your problems right now, where in fact it's only going to change the threat actors to point in a different direction and expose different gaps for us to need to pivot off that. So what are you seeing the partners that are doing well with creating their cybersecurity product bundles, whatever you want to term it? Who are the ones that are doing it well, and what does it look like?
Yeah, I think you sort of hit on the key component there is, the ones that are doing it well are putting language in their MSAs or in their contracts to effectively say that this will change, because the threat landscape is constantly changing. We don't know what the next vulnerability, the next attack is going to look like, the new ransomware that's going to come out tomorrow. So the ones that are doing well have sort of taken an approach to start somewhere and slowly built that up. But they're also, having those conversations with their client to say, if we see a new potential threat out there, you'll effectively need to give us the power to, pivot as needed, add that new solution, add that new process as part of our plan. And there will be a potential price rise with that. So just be aware. So with that, it allows them to basically lead as that true trusted advisor from a security sense, to say, well, our end goal is not to sell you stuff. Our end goal is to secure your environment and protect you as much as possible. And protect, I don't particularly like the use of that term, only because it gives a false sense of security in many cases that, we're 100% going to make sure that none of your data is breached and none is taken away. In reality, it's really around reducing your risk posture, right? And the basis of security is not about, protecting your data. It's about reducing the risk enough that makes it, that much harder for a threat actor to get in, that they might just give up and move on to the next target. Right? And that's effectively what you're trying to implement, because security is, countless people have said it, is not a 100% type of strategy. There's always going to be an element of risk in there, but if you can reduce it as much as possible, then the next person, then the threat actor will move on to the next person. Hopefully they're a little bit weaker and they can get through on that side. So the MSPs that are doing things well, and it's not necessarily, the big ones that are doing it well, because they struggle from a cybersecurity perspective themselves. And they've got additional resources that a lot of the smaller MSPs that don't have. But some of the smaller MSPs have actually done a good job, because they've made the time to effectively focus on, what do I do next, and actually, put aside an hour a week or a couple of hours a week to actually sit down with their team and say, all right, what are we seeing? What are our clients telling us with the tools that we have today? What are the events that are occurring that we need to tidy up? and they're constantly going through and reviewing, their tool set, their processes to hope to improve on that. And the ones that are doing that on a regular basis have the ability to then pivot and improve on it on a day-to-day basis. Whereas a lot of them are, like you mentioned, they build a product stack and just hope for the best and figure, that's going to cover them for the, immediate future. But they haven't gone through and tested whether that's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing. Maybe they've introduced a cheaper tool set with limited functionality, right? Because it is an AV or an EDR or whatever you're looking at the time. But they're not looking at the efficacy of that particular solution and whether it's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing or designed to be doing. So the other ones, the ones that are doing well, and it's really doesn't depend on size. It really depends on actually making the time to go through and do something about it.
Contracts is a good one. We polled the rooms when we did the roadshows, and not that many people really have contracts. And those that do aren't quite comfortable with what they've got. That's one thing to mention. The other one is around the that sort of protection language. I completely agree. Saying that we're going to protect things, if we're saying it, our clients already assume that we're protecting them 100%. What's actually more important is to highlight what we are doing and what we aren't doing and what the risks are involved. And this goes back to that conversation with us being able to sell security, but also that contract piece and our product bundle is this is the opportunity to reframe your clients. If you don't have a contract, you need one, and don't just copy it randomly off people that are sharing them around on forums. Don't do it. You need one that's actually been done by a legal professional that is setting it up for your business and it aligns with your insurances. But that protection, I'll just circle back around to that protection language again. What I'm seeing is a lot of MSPs have had huge, long-standing relationships with their clients, saying to be proud of. But we've always sort of sold in a smoke and mirrors way of, we've got your back, we've got all this protected, we keep it up and running. And a lot of MSP owners are struggling to sort of get over guilt of changing that language into what we need to do and sell and deliver in the modern times, because maybe 10 years ago we promised them we had their back and all you needed was AV and backup and you're covered. But what we need to realize is times have changed dramatically, and the advice that we had and what we were delivering for SMBs 5-10 years ago, that was our best practice at the time. But the best practices have changed as this threat landscape has rapidly changed. So don't get caught up in that legacy. Just go back and reframe your clients. And one of the tips that I've been telling partners is blame insurance companies for having to have contracts. Just say we're not going to get insured if we don't have modern contracts. Who's going to disagree with that? We're all small businesses. We all know that relationship. But take the time to explain what you do and what you don't do. So even if you haven't sold them cybersecurity, make them very aware that you're not doing XYZ cybersecurity activities, because that was never part of a managed service. And explain to them why. Explain to them how rapidly the threat landscape's changing. We can't sit and wait and sort of feel guilty on the past.
Yeah, I think I'd take that a step further as well. Partners are the ones that are doing contracts are talking about a particular vendor or particular brand that they're offering as part of their solution stack. In reality, the clients don't know and probably don't really care, what vendors you're using. They want to know what value you're bringing to them, how you're securing them, what protections, I guess, using that language, what protections you're putting in place, or preventative measures, or whatever you're trying to achieve at the end of the day. So a lot of partners need to step away from that because one, it doesn't allow you to, like I said, pivot when needed. Like if you need to introduce a new tool set because the one you're using today doesn't quite cover it for you. Or you need to take a slightly different approach with the latest and greatest new threats that might be coming out of the market. Cybersecurity insurance is changing the way we sort of approach, how we sort of bring out a contract. And you're right, those legacy clients that we've had for 10, 15 years. They probably haven't moved, they haven't grown, their risk posture hasn't changed for 10 years. But we have, as MSPs, we need to come out and effectively make decisions on what's best for us. I talk about this with a lot of partners. It really comes down to self-preservation, rather than solely focus on protecting your clients, because, your brand, your reputation is also at play, right? Particularly if you're in a market that is, heavily focused around a specific, niche industry, or if you're regionalised in outback Australia, where your clientele is in that one town, right, or a specific amount of towns. It's all focused around word of mouth marketing, and if you get impacted, well, guess what? The whole town's going to know about it. So they don't really sort of look at that approach and that risk inside the business. They are, have done a better job on, increasing their own or mitigating their own risk profile and bringing that down to a certain extent. But they're not looking at the long-term potential impacts and allowing their clients to effectively dictate, what they should be getting, which is no longer viable when it comes to cybersecurity, whether it's insurance or from a legal aspect. If their client gets pinged, if their client has a breach and PII data gets exposed, as an example, and they get taken to court for whatever reason, well, if their defense is, well, my client wouldn't let me secure them, that's not going to hold up, right? Because it really comes down to, the partners need to be more defensible, and they need to lead from the front. They need to, almost dictate what security needs to be implemented at that client site, based on their requirements, based on a framework, based on the local regulations or industry regulations. So there's a lot more at play that partners need to consider. And I generally suggest, right, if those legacy clients, or if you've got a client that pushes back on your advice and your packages or your contract that you're trying to deliver to them, don't take them on board, right? Or if they're existing client of yours, right, have a sit down with them and effectively fire them, and in the nicest way possible. Maybe hand them off to another friendly MSP that is in the same sort of headspace that client is at the time. Because from a risk mentality, when we look at supply chain risk, the MSPs are probably the biggest supply chain risk when it comes to IT services. We look at things, in the market today. Just last week, the 3CX was exposed, and that's a big supply chain risk. And guess who's the number one procurement of those services? Well, it's MSPs. They're the ones delivering it to downstream to their end clients. So they need to be mindful where they sit in that supply chain risk, and make sure that they cover themselves first before going and trying to sell cybersecurity. But do it in a strategic fashion that they're not missing out on those potential opportunities.
And this is why I talk a lot about us as MSPs needing to be premium players. What you just said about supply chain risks and us having to secure our own house and needing good, strong legal contracts. None of this is free. All of this is quite costly, and you can't do that by being a cheap MSP and giving away cheap things and low margins and not pricing up your offerings well enough, especially for those that don't have scale. It might be different if you've got tens of thousands of endpoints and you can get an economy of scale, but most of us might have 1,000 endpoints that we're managing. So we need to be charging those good amount of money so that we can afford to train, keep up with these things, invest in getting an MSSP to watch over our own MSP, getting contracts done up, etc., so that we can actually provide those professional level services that our clients need and what we need to do to flourish as a business and keep growing and keep providing those great outcomes for our clients. And I know we could go on all day and probably for days talking about this stuff, but we've covered a lot. What for those listening to this, what would be your sort of final takeaway thought of the day of what we've gone through? You're talking to a partner here that's sort of our average partner that we've been talking to. What would you point them in the direction of doing first?
Yeah, well, when I look at the challenges which we've sort of already spoken about, partners effectively taking that next step is, a framework is a brilliant way to sort of start to get focused and start to look at how do I build out my security stack, whether you're starting out or trying to sort of fill in gaps that you didn't realize you had. Some sort of framework would effectively help you, create that sort of next step and provide that guidance to getting on your way. When you're looking at tools, do your research. Go out there. Don't take the word of the person sitting next to you, your peers, or even the vendors trying to come sell you something. Try to see if that aligns and use those frameworks as your guidance, because a lot of the frameworks will actually tell you what you need as part of a tool set or a service. So that's going to be your guiding path. At the end of the day, like I said earlier, start somewhere. A lot of you already, unknowingly, right, or just by default doing security today. Patching is security 101, right? You get that right, and a lot of you are doing that through RMM. That's already a security service. I've seen partners, or some partners actually pull that out of their managed services to say, oh, well, this is now a security service, and plop that as part of their packages, where, their managed services or their IT services is now properly defined as what's going to provide me the security layer, and they're switching all of those elements across, which is your backup, your firewall management, your patching, as that baseline that usually, traditionally sat in the MSP or the managed services space, are now being pushed out into sort of new guidelines around what is my IT services and what's my security stack. So if you're taking that approach, you're really defining, your security layers, and you've already got those, bits and bobs in there that are starting to fill out your security stack. Again, we talked about security really being risk mitigation, right? The Essential 8 is a good starting point. If you can get, a good chunk of that off the line, the stats say that reduces your risk by up to about 85%. But there's a lot more we can be done, right? There's still that 15% element there that partners, even clients, think once I'm Essential 8 ready, well, I'm protected. Well, you're not. There's still an element of risk there that we need to consider. So there's a lot more you can do as beyond the Essential 8, and you shouldn't sit there and sort of be super focused on just complying with that, because there's other ways around it that threat actors will look for. We give a lot of examples when we talk about it on the road shows or in my consult calls. But it's effectively starting somewhere. Don't wait around. Look for help. You mentioned, if you don't have the resourcing, and a lot of us don't have the security resourcing and can't afford it or can't even keep them because of the limitations out there, go find someone who can. Work with that friendly MSSP that's going to help provide those additional services that you can lay on top of it. Don't try to do it all yourself. Because effectively, at the end of the day, you're going to get, caught in putting out fires from a day-to-day basis. You're going to get caught with other things that life takes hold of. So if you need that assistance, go find it. There's a lot of good industry experts out there that are willing to provide help. Find a peer that's friendly that has already gone through this exercise and ask them for support and how they did stuff. The one thing I've got to give a lot of credit to is Australian partners, or ANZ partners in particular, are willing to sort of openly provide information and actually support other peers out there, because they realise there's a lot of business to be had, and I think it serves the industry as a whole if they're sharing information and getting everyone up into the same speed or into the same direction. It's all better for the industry, because that one cowboy out there that's doing the wrong thing and selling something that they don't actually have actually brings out down the whole industry. So the partner base across ANZ specifically, I've been super impressed by them being able to open up their brains and their knowledge and experience and actually sharing that with the wider industry.
Some great thoughts, and I think if I was to boil it down even further, is create yourself a plan and then start working the plan and refine it. And we're going to, like we said, if we could talk about this all day, we'll wrap up today, and we'll get a regular thing going, sharing this kind of information and dive a bit deeper into some of these topics that we surface level touched. Just to keep sharing that information. It's really hard to keep up. So follow me and Elliot on LinkedIn. We share a lot of resources and information a lot of the time, just to help curate that journey, because we know how hard it is. But look out for some more stuff that we're doing, and keep up. Hopefully this was useful, and thanks for joining me, Elliot. I'm looking forward to grabbing you and getting you on next time.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.